You wait forever for a long standing Nintendo property to break a decade plus long silence and then to do it in as many weeks. Yet last week I was deep diving the credits of Star Fox, but today I'm back to review the people behind Rhythm Heaven Groove. The first thing to point out from a deep dive of the credits, no Yoshio Sakamoto. Sakamoto's role in previous Rhythm Heaven titles always seemed a little bit distant. Once he was, very unusually, credited as a general producer, which is usually a level of seniority reserved for the head of EPD, Shinya Takahashi himself, and of course Miyamoto before that, although occasionally others do step in. Indeed, it may well have been a part of Nintendo's contingency planning that occasionally other senior leaders like Eguchi and Sakamoto would take on Takahashi's role. This would certainly be a sensible way to ensure expertise is widely distributed, and there's a succession plan in the event of any kind of emergency. Nevertheless, the absence of Sakamoto entirely here, and from the Tomodachi Ask the Developer interview, and also the way he was speaking in 2024's Ask the Developer interview for Emio, makes me think there's only one sensible conclusion. Sakamoto has retired from Nintendo. Now, to be clear, this doesn't completely preclude him from returning in a slightly different, perhaps more advisory role, but the top credited producer on this title is the head of EPT4 and the producer of the entire Nintendo Switch 2 console, Koichi Kawamoto. Kawamoto's team are very much absorbing the more casual end of Nintendo content lately, and so this fits right in, although interestingly, it's his first actual producer credit since the Switch 2 itself. Co-producing this game is Switch Sports head honcho Takayuki Shimomura and Switch Sports lead Yoshikazu Yamashita. Basically, the entire trinity of EPD4 leads all shepherded this title, which makes me think that probably it didn't need all that much of a heavy hand in the first place, as we will get to in due course. One last thought on Sakamoto, though. In the Tomodachi Life reviews, I mentioned that actually, in many respects, although he was involved throughout, his credit probably reflected a previous point where he was involved in the property, possibly for the period up to around 2024, maybe 2025, with the final development of the game being taken to the finish line by other people. I think with Rhythm Heaven, this does suggest that the title was put into development a little bit later on. It's obviously a smaller scale game, and so I do wonder quite how far it was into development when it was actually announced in 2025. And I actually wonder whether it might have been put into development rather late on as a possible backup game, given that in the later period of the Switch, they really were running short on major titles. And if you think about it, even in 2024, we had remakes and remasters, games such as Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door and Luigi's Mansion 2 HD. We had smaller titles like Any of the Smiling Man and Nintendo World Championships NES Edition, but we didn't really have a lot of major new titles. And I can see that in this period of time, if the Switch 2 was delayed, it might have made a lot of sense to Nintendo to commission another very small Switch game for this period, and this might have been either after Sakamoto had left, or at least when he was winding down and in no position to take on a major project. I doubt we'll ever know for sure, and of course there's no Ask the Developer interview that seems to have come out yet, although fingers crossed one might emerge, but at any rate it does suggest that there has been quite a long time now for there to be a transition away from the leadership of Sakamoto for these kinds of games. Now, the director, Kazuyoshi Osawa, may not have had a credit since 2011's Wii Play Motion, aside from a quick special thanks on Dr. Karishima's brain training for Nintendo Switch in 2019, but that didn't stop him from returning to the property he initiated. As the chief director of the early Rhythm Heavens as well as the early WarioWares, it's evident that he needed little supervision. What supervision he did need was provided by Sakamoto's longtime associate, Katsuya Yamano, who more recently was project managing Metroid Dread and Tomodachi Life. Although Yamano now seems to be working more with EPT4, it'll be interesting to see what exactly happens with 2D Metroid, assuming the series continues, which I expect it will, given there doesn't now seem to be an EPT Group 7 in the same way that there once was. In fact, of the three programmers, only EPT4's Naoki Nasuda hadn't worked on a previous Rhythm Heaven game, while the art director Ko Takeuchi of the game also had a long experience of both Rhythm Heaven and WarioWare, and for that matter, on Wario Land as a designer for Wario Land 4. Tsunku, of course, remained as the composer, albeit outside Nintendo, and is rather endearingly given the credit of miracle producer right at the end of the game, even after Shinya Takahashi and Shuntaro Furukawa, and quite right too. The special thanks do include a couple of familiar names, notably Intelligent Systems, who of course have shouldered the heavy lifting on the WarioWare series for some time, but this specific game is very much an internal Nintendo affair. In other words, this is another case of Nintendo having retained talent for an extremely long time and reviving a core project as soon as they seemingly felt able. What makes the difference for Rhythm Heaven being revived as opposed to, say, Art Academy or indeed Golden Sun, other tiny micro properties that do have strong fan followings? Well, firstly, don't discount the fact that this game is clearly very cheap to produce. A tiny number of credits compared to most games, and so even if the game isn't full price and the people who are credited are highly experienced and therefore likely to be very well remunerated even by Nintendo standards, it's still likely to be a very profitable endeavour for Nintendo overall. Also, though, this was an internal project, and so Nintendo was able to call upon the same experienced group. It's likely that there will be a degree of continuity built in for the future, as of course all of those three major production leads at DPD4 have now had experience in developing the game, and so will be well positioned to ensure that future Rhythm Heavens continue to come out periodically, although I suspect for the time being, Nintendo will stick with trying to develop and expand Groove, and I also suspect it will probably depend a lot on whether or not they can get back Tsunku, since he's clearly at the heart of the development here. There is yet to be a situation where there are two Rhythm Heavens on a single platform, and while strictly speaking there is yet to be a Nintendo Switch 2 version of Rhythm Heaven, it may be more prudent at this point to give the series a second life in a couple of years by doing a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, or simply waiting until the end of the Switch 2 generation to keep it going with another title. Either way, for the time being, Rhythm Heaven aficionados are eating pretty well, and it's great to see this game finally launch. Entertaining though it can doubtless be, I suspect I will give this particular game a pass, or maybe wait for a special offer. I'm currently on my, I think, 5th playthrough of Star Fox, so I'm not in any particular rush to get into a new title, and I'm looking forward to Splatoon Raiders in a few weeks. Currently in Star Fox, I'm spending more time with the individual challenges rather than the run-throughs, but I'm still enjoying the game and would still highly recommend it. If you would like to see more from the channel, please do consider supporting the Patreon for early, ad-free and exclusive content. And of course, please do like, share, hype, subscribe, all of those kind of fun things. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I will see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.